Yeah, I remember it's a big pivot in my business life. And I remember I knew as soon as before Dragon's Den aired, I knew there was a glass ceiling to it. I knew that the idea was there, but it was a product that needed to be acquired by a bigger group for it to be merged with a different company for it to be successful. It was more like an add-on or a feature. There was a glass ceiling in terms of the physical product. There was a glass ceiling in terms of like the customization. There was a limit of how many orders you could do, and we were hitting that. And I was like, I remember a friend of mine's parents. Her parents bought a house in Wales, and it was the first ever time I ran everything off my phone, like my whole life at that point off my phone. I remember leaving my phone at the house at like 1 o'clock, and I go up and I went to the golf course or whatever, and I was sitting there and I was like, is this actually the life I want to live in terms of building something I don't enjoy? Though the money was pretty deep, was very good, we were progressing quite well, but there was a glass ceiling and there was only so far we were going to be able to take it. And I was thinking like, am I really enjoying what I'm building? And the answer was, no, I'm not enjoying what I'm building.
Thank you so much for clicking on this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. The ambition of the podcast is to show relatable stories from young entrepreneurs doing some incredible things to inspire the next generation, including you listening wherever you are. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years and the ambition has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the scale of where we want to go. We want to bring on bigger guests for you guys to show more and more relatable and inspiring stories from young entrepreneurs across the world. The majority of you guys listening haven't subscribed to the podcast yet. All you have to do is click that subscribe button wherever you're listening on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now allow us to bring on bigger guests and ask the questions to them that you really want to hear. And it really is that simple. So thank you again for clicking on the podcast and enjoy the episode. Myles, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. It's been a while since I've wanted to get you on, especially because there's a lot of coverage, especially after you were on Dragon's Den, the youngest ever person to get investment on Dragon's Den as a solo founder.
Yeah.
That's basically how I came across you. But that moment in your life must have been pretty crazy.
Yeah, pretty crazy indeed. 18, recently dropped out of university at the time. Never no exposure to any sort of real business acumen. And then suddenly thrown on Dragon's Den in front of 5 professionals was a pretty interesting time in my life. And then when it aired was pretty crazy as well. We hit multiple million view videos on Facebook, TikTok, and then 4 million people watching it live on the BBC. So not a bad turnout, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll obviously talk about Dragon's Den a bit more later on in the episode because I know people are massively interested. We've had people from Dragon's Den on the podcast before. We had Arminda very, very early on, who was the youngest I think that came with a group. So he was 15 or 16 at the time with Boot Buddy. So if anyone's interested, go back into the archives. I think he was like episode number 20 or something. So we've recorded like 100 episodes since then. But yeah, really excited to have you on. And I'd love to start off the podcast essentially with how you started Haze Cards.
Yeah, so a bit of backstory about me. I went to the London Institute of Banking and Finance to study finance at University in London. I was on scholarship at the time, so I was rowing for the university, and I was in my dorm room quite a lot, and I always had a bit of like business acumen about me. I would have thought. And then I was thinking, like, why is the product we use most, so your bank card, your business card, why is it so boring and why is it so impersonal? Now we're starting to see Revolut introduce customized cards. At the time, Revolut weren't really that prominent in that area. So we thought, why not create a metal credit and debit card that you can fully customize online, you can upload photos, all of that really. And long story short, we through lots of prototyping, using products from China, different templates in the manufacturing in the UK, we ended up making a prototype. So my first Santander current account card, we ended up turning into metal. Bit of a bodged job, but over time we refined the processes and managed to be able to create the first metal credit and debit card. And then it was like, right, how do we market this? Is it actually a feasible product to sell? I ended up getting my student maintenance loan in. So in the UK, you get like a maintenance loan. And I spent that all on a laser engraver. So in my dorm room, you can imagine, I was an 18-year-old uni student, you've got your pot noodles, whatever. And I had a big fat laser engraver that would engrave and etch credit cards. And in the morning, I would drop them off at the Royal Mail drop-off and then go to university. And it's a pretty crazy time in my life, really.
When you say that this is, you mentioned we quite a lot, but in actual fact, it was just you in your room at university with a big.
I say we because it's like, well, yeah, it was just me, unfortunately. Yeah, it was an absolutely crazy time in my life when I look back on it. Like, you don't realize how ridiculous it is until you look back on it. And I was just kind of doing it with no thought, really. There was no, a lot of times now you think about your business, think about your business plan, whereas there was just kind of like jumping right into it and fail on the go and trying to fail quick, fail fast, and then recover fast. But like £2,500 laser engraver, that was a bit of a hit to the budget, the food budget that week. Anyway, long story short, we managed to release 5 different colors of master credit and debit cards. We filmed every single card we made and put it on TikTok. We had an account, it got banned, unfortunately, I'm guessing due to kind of the safety concerns, but we were growing quite rapidly on TikTok. It was a time where you could post a TikTok video and it'd do a few thousand views with just a crappy video. And then we started pushing them to Instagram Reels, and then we did a lot of outreach. We secured the likes of Porsche as well, and On the Beach, one of the UK's largest holiday providers. Bear in mind, I was literally just in my university dorm, kind of like winging it almost, but it was starting to work. Our first website was on Wix, built by myself, and we were bootstrapping it, no investment, nothing like that really.
It's a wonderful story. Like I was very much invested in this story because it's a very cool one. And I guess like, how did you first sort of like make the first metal card? I guess like just a bit more detail around that before we go into the growth side of things.
A lot of trial and error. It's quite easy nowadays to kind of find a product online and sell it, whereas there's not like a product out there you can just buy from China and ship it over.
Yeah.
So number one, especially when we had no investment, no development costs, or no development budget, we had to we contacted a local stainless steel metal kind of manufacturing facilities to create 10 prototypes that had the card EMV chip, the mag strip on the back, and then we kind of had to learn and kind of, it was just a lot of back and forward and testing really, kind of trying out what method works and like a lot of failing and then trying to refine the process so that if we make 10 cards, only 9 of them fail, and then kind of increase the chances that they would work. So just lots of testing really on the cheapest way possible.
That's so cool. So yeah, you bought this laser engraver with your student loan, which we're not going to endorse or anything, but you can
no,
do what you want.
We're not. No.
But that's what you did, and then built these prototypes, got them to work, which is cool. All again from your university dorm. And I'm guessing you weren't going into any lectures at this point.
I think I remember this was quite early on in my first year, and it was quite early on in my kind of university endeavor really, and I think my attendance went to like 64%. So it was a time where you could almost watch lectures online as well. So yes, my attendance was quite low, but I was trying to catch up with PowerPoints, but overall it was taking a bit of a nosedive, to be honest with you.
So I guess at what point did you decide to like grow the business in terms of like, what were the sort of growth strategies there? Because yeah, you got it to work, you tested out with your own card, you bought this metal engraver. I guess what were you trying out to get it to work, and then what was actually the massive growth factor?
Yeah, I think our first thought was how do we market this and grow it as cheaply as possible, because we had no investment, like I said. At first, number one, the product cost was quite small, so we I remember we ran at like a 90% margin at the end. It was about a year and a half ago now, so I'm trying to think back. But a lot of our channels were kind of social media, TikTok, Facebook, even Reddit as well. Kind of just pushing the product out there because it is a cool product. It's a visual product, and people like to engage with a product that's visual and they can kind of that's customized to them, and it's quite satisfying. I'm sure some of our old videos are still up, but the way the laser engraver kind of etches the metal out is quite a cool kind of ASMR satisfying thing to do. So we kind of push loads of videos on my personal account, on Haze Cards' account, and yeah, just a lot of trial and error. And the best thing about the product is it's a bit of word of mouth. And then because the products were so high margin, we recycled that money that we made and put it back into kind of TikTok ads, paid social, and a better website.
Mm. So the majority of it came from these visual video elements,
Mm,
such as TikTok, Instagram
100%.
Reels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hired a friend of mine. She was really good at, well, she had no past experience, but all she had used was her personal TikTok account. And we hired her on like a, whatever, like £250 a month retainer to create videos for us. And they just did so well. There was just a knack to it of like the staying up with the trends. And if there was a trend, we'd create a card on the trend, and then it would do well on TikTok. So it's all about kind of, for us, social media was all our strategy. Sorry.
And that social media strategy with the short form videos and the £250 retainer from this girl that helped you out, that got you to 120K revenue in
It
terms of
did,
like
yeah.
within 6 months. That's insane.
Yeah, 6, 7 months, yeah. Yeah, number one, our product was pretty high margin. We sold them for £84, 84 to 73, if I can remember correctly, and then up to 104 at some points. And then those big kind of corporate deals as well helped quite a lot because, well, there's no marketing spend there, securing the likes of Porsche. So, yeah, I think a lot of word of mouth and a lot of like kind of customer service and making sure that every product we sent out was perfect.
I guess like with those guys, like the big corporate clients, how did you get those? Because did they discover you on TikTok or was it through different channels?
TikTok. We weren't on
Really?
LinkedIn at that point. Yeah,
That's
we had a
interesting.
lot of associates. Those companies kind of, I'm guessing they found the video just scrolling on their personal and shared it to higher ups or whatever,
Yeah.
or buyers or whatever. But yeah, we did a batch of metal wallets as well. So we weren't just fully cards. So we had these metal wallets which were also customizable, and then like these metal business cards which were also customizable as well. So it wasn't
Mm.
all about the credit and debit cards. We had the metal wallets and the metal cards, and like the idea behind that was, yes, if you Google metal wallets, there's 100 different options, but ours were cool and customizable. You could upload a photo for the same price and get it engraved and make it personal for the same price as a competitor down the road that had them on for £15, but they were just plain black. So
Mm.
we kind of went with that theme and kind of, I guess, that layout really.
What was the craziest point in terms of those initial sort of 6 months? Because going from sort of zero, just buying the laser engraver to £120,000 worth of revenue, there must have been points where you got an order for say, hundreds per week, and it's still just you in your dorm room. So it's like, how did you manage to keep up with all of that?
Um, I probably had, looking back, I probably had an unhealthy relationship with sleep. I didn't sleep very well. I struggle to sleep in general now, anyway. But at the time, I just would. Number one, lectures became like a second thought. To be quite frank, I felt like I was spinning a lot of plates, and some were falling off. But yeah, I would just say it's just like, I was back to back. Every minute that I had spare, I was putting it back into kind of fulfilling orders. I think what I struggled with was the how quick it. I remember someone saying to me before I started the business, like, uh, fast growth can be an issue, and I was like, "What do you mean? Growing too fast can be an issue?" I was, I've definitely realized fast growth. We didn't have the processes in place to be able to do those kind of orders and that kind of quantity. So, I mean, we made some mistakes like every business. And I feel like the issue we had was when you have a small business, you make one mistake, it's okay because you only have, let's say you have 100 orders. One mistake isn't that big of an issue. But when you're making a mistake and you've got such a high turnover of orders, that mistake becomes quite a big mistake. And we had a couple of them where it was like a, oh shit kind of moment. But yeah, a lot of strategy, a lot of kind of just cracking on. If you look at a lot of today's startups, there's a lot of paperwork behind the structure and behind the processes. And I almost look at that in a bit of wasted time, to be honest, because for us it was more like just getting stuck in and getting cracking on instead of worrying about the processes. It was like, let's get our heads down and crack on with these orders. I drafted in friends of mine as well to kind of pack orders. And at one point we were buying a second laser engraver. And I was quite worried about the power usage of the two laser engravers in a dorm room, because obviously we don't pay any, university don't pay any utilities. So there's just things like that you have to worry about, which you wouldn't have to normally worry about. It's, university dorm, you've got fire hazards, you've got, I mean, it was just a monstrosity of a dorm room, to be honest. But what I'm trying to say is it worked, and we cracked on, and we made it work, which is a good lesson, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. So I always think that because, when you start a business and you're sort of more established, and you especially if you come from corporate, you get to, you start it and you are sort of always thinking about that paperwork stuff in terms of, registering the company and like doing, trademarks and stuff like that, which, don't get me wrong, it's very important for sure. But there is definitely some like something valuable in terms of just literally getting stuck in from day one and just trying to fail as fast as you can and then learning from that. And if it does sort of take off to a certain point, then you start worrying about registering a company and doing the trademarks and things like that. Because I feel like people get too caught up.
100%. I look back and I don't know if I saw it as a business, and it's crazy to think that now looking back, but at the time I don't think I saw it as a business, and I had a different mindset. Whereas now the way we run our current company, there's such a structured mindset, whereas there I was kind of just, is a bit of a hobby. And I think that's why it worked, is that I just cracked on, and whatever made logical sense, we did that instead of kind of prancing around on Zoom for 2 hours. It was more like we just cracked on, and we tried and tested, and if it failed, we moved on. And the best thing was, it was just me. We had no investors. Their investors are great and they're good to bounce feedback off, but it was just me running the company, and I could do what I want, and I could test what I wanted to do. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes at the beginning, taking the wrong decision quickly is better than taking the right decision, but it's taking a long time to do. I'm a big believer in that. Whereas if you're more established, as you said, then yeah, it makes sense to take time and get feedback in order to like make moves. But at the beginning, I think yeah, just making a decision quickly and learning from that rather than thinking too deeply, it makes a ton of sense.
I look back on there, and I think I couldn't ask for like a better experience in terms of the lessons I learned. You spend a lot of time as an entrepreneur. I think you spend a lot of time. You learn a lot about yourself and a lot about, because you spend a lot of time with yourself. You learn a lot about how you think. And I look back and I think I couldn't have asked for like a better work experience. I call it work experience. The first company, that's what I call it day to day. The lessons we learn in and out, there's no way they could be replicated in like a classroom or in a textbook. Or though I wasn't doing a business degree, I felt like I was doing a business degree, because you learn so much on the job. You're talking with people every day who are so high up,
and you face like a ton of problems, right? Like
you face the music pretty early
Yeah.
on, and you learn to handle stress. Like I said, I used to row for Great Britain as a junior, and a lot of the things we learn, because as an athlete you learn that like failing is not an option, how to handle stress. Let's say you're in a game or a match, whatever. And it's the same principles there. Like, you've got to learn to handle that stress. No one's going to come and save you. And I think there was just so many lessons learned. Like, for example, it's that hands-on experience that just cannot be replicated. That's why I just love the idea of apprenticeships. Thank God I went to university, because it worked out the way it worked out. But if I was looking back, the apprenticeship route, it's just perfect for those kind of avenues, kind of the startup business side.
To give you guys listening an idea of what like this is definitely what Myles thinks in terms of I guess like zero paperwork. You registered for Dragon's Den without actually registering the business.
Yeah,
which is insane. Like you apply for one of the biggest like TV shows without actually registering the business.
I can give the story on that. I was 18 when my birthday's in August, so I was 18 for the whole of the year. And I've been watching Dragon's Den since I was quite young. Like maybe 10 or 11 or whatever, with Peter Jones or whoever. And I remember I was in my university library, and I was like, there was no thought about actually going on Dragon's Den. It was just like, let's just fill the form in and see what happens. Like, nothing's going to come of it. And it was the worst application form I'd ever written out in my whole entire life. The boxes were so big, and I was like, I can't bother spending so much time on this application form when it's not going to happen. I was so young, it wasn't a feasible option in my head, but I filled it out anyway, because I was like, oh, why not fill it out? I get an email or a call from this lady from Dragon's Den, from the BBC, and she's like, Myles, we'd like to put you on for the next round, interview for the next round. And I was like, right, okay, not going to get through, but I'll do it anyway. And she's asked like, what do you value your company? I'm like, I'm 18. I just started this business not long ago. I'm at university. And I'm just thinking, oh, 100 grand. Yeah, I'll value 100 grand. That's pretty cool that my business is worth 100 grand. Anyway, from then it stuck, and then that's what we went to Dragon's Den on. But anyway, long story short, but yeah, an absolute crazy period in my life, but loads of lessons learned.
And yeah, they were asking for like paperwork and stuff like that you didn't have at the time.
They were. I remember we spent a lot of time with a lot of accountants, kind of getting everything organised and in order, because you have to understand, I was an 18-year-old. My parents had no clue what I was doing. My parents didn't. It was such an off the cut thing to do. Start the business at university. No one knew what I was doing. The processes weren't in place. We kind of just cracked on, and then figured that bit out later. Luckily, we got it all sorted, and got onto the show or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I just couldn't ask for a better kind of experience into the startup world.
Thing is, like I've obviously spoken to a lot of people that have been on Dragon's Den, both got investment, haven't got investment, haven't aired in terms of their episode. So I hear a lot about behind the scenes on Dragon's Den. But for people that I guess are listening to your story for the first time, or listening to behind the scenes of Dragon's Den for the first time, how long was that whole application process, if you can obviously share? Yeah, and then we'll go from there.
I'm under NDA with a little bit, but I can vaguely share kind of the bits and pieces. I just remember it being the most stressful few months of my life.
Really?
So this researcher, when she contacted me on day one, I thought it's like the last time I'm going to speak to her. She's going to ask me evaluation. I'm going to go on to the next stage, and then it's going to be like, sorry, we can't take you any further. And I remember she called me back, I don't know, whatever the time gap was, and was like, Myles, on to the next stage. And then it went, next stage. And I was like, oh, crap. Next stage. Oh, crap. Next stage. To the point, and this poor girl, I spoke to her every single day for like that 4 or 5 month period. And I think it was around 4 months maybe. And I spoke to her every day because we were just back and forward with like the amount of paperwork they needed.
Like due diligence stuff.
Yeah. And I didn't know the terminology or for term sheet, whatever it was, or pitch decks. I didn't know any of that. So I was learning constantly.
Yeah.
And I wasn't on LinkedIn. I didn't even know what LinkedIn was. I couldn't care less about LinkedIn. I couldn't care less about that, or the corporate or the startup side. And I just, we're moving on. Anyway, long story short, after kind of like 4 or 5 months, I'm on holiday with a friend at the time, and she calls me. She's like, Myles, you're on Dragon's Den. Like, you need to come in and film. I'm like, what do you mean I'm on? And she's like, in 2 weeks, you need to be in Manchester to film. I'm like, oh my God. So at this point, I don't actually feel like, it hasn't kicked in that I'm actually going on Dragon's Den. Bear in mind, still 18, been watching the show for like the past eight years. Going to Manchester, I'm in this hotel, and she's like, right, Myles, we'll meet you at the studio at 11. I go down to the studio, and there's like me and this other guy. His name was James Higgins. He was on the show as well, and we were in the green room for like 6 hours before any of us went on, and we were just talking for 6 hours.
6 hours, wow.
Yeah, he's like 30 odd. We were just talking back and forward for like 6 hours, practicing our pitch. It was incredible. But when he went in first actually. He went in first, and you don't see anything to do with Dragon's Den when you're in the green room. You're kind of getting your makeup done or whatever. He goes in, and like an hour and a half later, you get no warning, and he's like, Myles, come through. And it's like, holy shit.
Your heart must have been pounding for about an hour.
It was probably the first time I'd worn like a shirt and suit pants. When James went in, I thought, oh my God. Like I was asking the crew, like, when am I on next? When am I on next? They're like, I've got no clue. And they called me in, and it was just the bit of PTSD, to be honest with you. Seeing the whole behind the scenes set is such a big operation, and I think that's what kind of threw me off a little bit. But anyway, because I'd seen so many fails on Dragon's Den, I was like, I can't be that person who forgets their number. So I walked out and I gave my numbers straight away. And you kind of forget you're on a TV show, and you just start pitching to them and discussing the idea. And luckily, we had a good ride and scored investment from Steven Bartlett. But the experience was incredible. And I remember when we finished recording, it was about 2 hours or so of the actual pitch. I left and I was like, what the hell actually happened? That was crazy. And I ended up telling my parents didn't know I was going on, actually. It was only after they found out I scored investment that I told
They
them.
didn't know you were going on.
Yeah, because I didn't want to not get investment. And then,
Oh, right. I see.
And then, well, they would have found out anyway because I would have been on TV.
Yeah, you would have been on TV, yeah.
I didn't want to go on and then not get investment and then be like, look, Mum and Dad, I didn't get any investment. So anyway, I told them after that I got investment.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think like what people don't see is sitting in the green room. That whole camera setup, obviously you don't see because you're the one that's viewing on TV. I think another surprising thing that I learned like a couple years ago was that the actual pitch itself isn't like 10 minutes, 15 minutes is what's on TV. It's about what, like 2 hours, right?
2 hours. I've heard some people say it's like 3 hours for them, but mine was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. It goes by quite fast, to be honest with you. And I remember I went to the wall. So they've got like the wall, and you get your offer, and you go to the wall. And I went to the wall twice. And a lot of people, when they go on Dragon's Den, they'd think, "Oh, like who am I going to accept if I get an offer?" I must have had a lack of confidence in myself. I didn't think I was going to get an offer, so I had no one in mind of like who I would pick. And I got 3 offers: Peter, Touker, and Steven. And I go to the wall. I'm like, "Oh shit. I need to go to the wall and just think about this." But I couldn't, because there's so many cameras and it's such a production, it's so hard to make logical choices. And I was in the corner like, what the hell is this? So I instantly was like, right, I can't pick. I turned around and was like, along the lines of, what can you offer to me in terms of mentorship? But they only showed me going to the wall once, so I actually went to the wall twice. And I turned around and they were like, Myles, we can do this, this. I think Steve said along the lines of like, you're my it, I've been down your pathway, which is very true. He went to Manchester University, Manchester Met, and dropped out as well. So it's all kind of the same. But then a part of me was like, Peter Jones is Peter Jones. 10-year-old Myles would have watched him and thought, that's really cool that it's Peter Jones. But I just kind of thought they're all really good candidates, and Steve was best for us at the time. But yeah, turned around, went to the wall and was like, I'll accept your offer, and that was it from there. But
very cool.
But yeah, I just think there's so many things that fell into place to make that happen, which was great.
Can you discuss what happens after you accept an offer?
Yeah, I mean, it would be different. I don't know how much I can say, but it's different for everyone. You go through the same due diligence processes you would with any other investment, really. From that point on, it's just like a normal investment deal. Like you would with anyone else.
Okay, got you. In terms of,
sorry, go on. I was going to say there's a from the date it's filmed to the date it gets aired is like 6-7 months. So we had that 6-7 months of just growing the company in silence, where no one knew we'd be on Dragon's Den, which is so annoying because you want to shout out about it and let everyone know. Because I knew I was youngest. That was like the key thing for me, was like, if I would have gone at 19, it wasn't good. It had to be 18. And I was just, thank God I was born in August. So that was 18 at the time. But yeah, incredible opportunity.
Yeah, so I was going to talk to you about that in terms of, it's a few months before it airs, after you record. When it does record, I guess, like, how does your life, and we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, so like, how did your life, like, what happened in the moment, and then how did your life change after that?
Yeah, so we had a rough idea of when they were going to show it. We could kind of predict when I was going to be out, but not the exact month. Sorry, not the exact week. We knew kind of January, February time is when I would probably air, but we had no confirmation from the BBC. They were very strict on the dates that I'd be released, and I was thinking, look, I need to get more stock. I need to get logistics involved in terms of packaging, whatever. And they wouldn't tell me. And we only found out 2 weeks in advance we were going to be aired on that week. So it was like, we've got 2 weeks to try and sort everything we need to sort. I know contestants who their products need to be ordered 6 months in advance. And it's like, how are you meant to prepare your stock room or whatever 2 weeks in advance? So that was definitely a bit of a knock to say. But look, I was quite lucky that in those 6 months I had a lot of support around me, in terms of people from the investment or whatever. I had a good amount of support where I could learn a lot in those 6 months about like the space I was going into. It was almost like an accelerated business course, to be honest with you. Learn a lot about kind of the genuine logistics behind the business instead of just, okay, the idea is there, but how do we make this into a proper business with all the bells and whistles? And luckily we had that 6-month time period to get ready for Dragon's Den and like the logistics that happened. But when we aired, it was a complete whirlwind. I think 4.5 million people were watching the show live, 4 million on Facebook, 1 million views on Facebook. I think actually 7 million views on Facebook, a couple million views on TikTok. I mean, it was just pretty incredible. But yeah, I actually moved home. We moved into an office and I moved back to Manchester when I dropped out of university. So I was in my dorm room when it aired. I was at home and in the office trying to kind of control everything. But yeah, like I said, learning on the job and kind of trying to fail quickly and yeah.
And then in terms of like orders and website visits, like was it crazy?
Yeah, it was manic. Probably didn't prepare as much as I should have, I would say. But it's such a difficult thing to test for. You know, you can only predict it so much, and it's such a difficult thing, and you just have to go for it. It's not going to be perfect in terms of, and that's kind of my thinking behind it was, let's prepare as much as we can, but it could go better, it could go worse, and it went really good for us. And we definitely learned fairly quickly like how to handle the volume and the customer service, and yeah. But to be quite frank with you, it's an incredibly stressful process after the den in terms of the orders, because your business kind of goes from doing okay to like suddenly overnight you're dealing with the amount of emails, publicity, whatever overnight just explodes. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like an absolute crazy process, and that's again how I discovered you for the first time. It was like BBC articles and stuff like that. So yeah, like outside of the business side of things, but for you personally, because you said like you didn't have a LinkedIn account back then, but obviously you must have set one up, and it's like all of that stuff. Like for you, outside of Haze Cards, like for you personally, how did it change you?
Yeah, it definitely did change a lot of things in my personal life. It's you as a person changes as well. You know, if when you're dealing with that amount of, also you have to understand your life changes. You go from a university. Think if anyone's watching, you know, think of your university life and then triple it to the amount of stress. I mean, I really had to learn how to handle stress and how to, you know, I had a girlfriend at the time. We'd been together like 2.5 years. You know, she had to figure out a different Myles and a different, you know, because me as a person changed like anyone else would, because the amount of stress I felt like and I do now, like a 40-year-old man, because you're learning so much. Like a one day in my life back then was like, oh my God, that's a day. We didn't have any weekends. It was all like Monday to Monday. And I think, you know, my parents had to learn to adapt slightly. My girlfriend had to learn how to adapt slightly. And my friends as well. You know, your life changes. You realize you can't go out and drink there. You know, you can't go here. And everyone kind of has to learn.
What do you mean in terms of that you can't go out in certain places?
Well, I mean in terms of you're working on the business. You're working.
Oh, I see. Like so, dedicating more time to the business.
Dedicating more time. In my kind of head, it was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity where I've got some great people around me. Why not make the most of it? And I think for me as well, I knew I was learning so much and I was progressing so much. I dropped out of university as well, so I was full time, and it was a bit of a whirlwind of a time. And I look back and I think, whatever happens now, I've probably been through like what felt like the most stressful part of my life, to be honest with you. Yeah, and kind of just building on that, really.
Was the stress just from the business, or was it from, say, publicity? Or was it from people? Like, I don't know. Like, was it just from the business side of things?
I think yes, it was the business side of things. You know, the people. I didn't have a huge full-time team. I didn't really know the direction I wanted to take the business. I think it was quite a difficult progression because it was just a university business. So the foundations we had built it on weren't for it to be this popular. You know, it's like I almost explain, like we had foundations for a small house, and then suddenly we built a big house on small foundations. And I think that's incredibly difficult to do and progress. And I knew there was a bit of a glass ceiling to it, to be honest. But it was just a very stressful time in terms of the pressure when you start doing well, the pressure to keep doing well, I think is pretty difficult. But like I said, I had a great, every Wednesday I'd meet up with a group of founders and kind of discuss problems. I was the youngest by far there. And just having those people around me that I could just bounce ideas off, and, they might have 30 years in the business world and they go, Myles, that's stupid, or Myles, think about it this way, or whatever. I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome kind of brewing, to be honest.
Because you were what, like 18, 19? So
I was 18 at the bulk of this.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty fresh. And then was 19, turned 19, and we were still progressing really nicely. So yeah, I think just a lot of learning, to be honest with you.
And then, so you talk about the glass ceiling, and that's essentially where the acquisition came from.
Yeah, I remember it's a big pivot in my business life, and I remember I knew as soon as before Dragon's Den aired, I knew there was a glass ceiling to it. I knew that the idea was there, but it was a product that needed to be acquired by a bigger group. And for it to be merged with a different company, for it to be successful. It was more like an add-on or a feature, I would say. There was a glass ceiling in terms of the physical product. There was a glass ceiling in terms of like the customization. There was a limit of how many orders you could do, and we were hitting that. And I was like, I remember a friend of mine's parents, her parents bought a house in Wales, and it was the first ever time that I ran everything off my phone, like my whole life at that point off my phone. I remember leaving my phone at the house at like 1:00, and I'd go up and I went to the golf course or whatever, and I was sitting there and I was like, is this actually the life I want to live in terms of building something I don't enjoy? Though the money was pretty deep, was very good. We were progressing quite well, but there was a glass ceiling and there was only so far we were going to be able to take it. And I was thinking, like, am I really enjoying what I'm building? And the answer was, no, I'm not enjoying what I'm building, and it's not going to get any better than this. So we lined up an acquisition as best as possible and found an exit, as I knew that I just was burnt out with the whole process and the whole business. I wasn't burnt out with business in general. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to build things, and I loved the startup space, and I knew I had a bit of a knack for it. But that business at the time, very stressful. It wasn't meant to be as big as it was. And I didn't want to burn myself out for future endeavors. So I was very cautious on that. And I remember I was just sat there and I was like, this is not the life I want to live. And I think it took a lot of thinking to be able to think.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting story, because it's like you got to a stage where you kind of reached the diminishing like point of the curve, where you kind of reached the limit in terms of like revenue, in terms of output, in terms of like all these different things. And most importantly, your energy and your mental state, I guess, like, because you were sort of like getting to a point where you just mentioned you were kind of like hating it, or like really disliking what you were doing.
Towards the end, I was definitely disliking what I was doing. In everyone's eyes, it was a perfect business. Our margins were huge, but there was no love or enjoyment in the products. I had no passion behind building this company. But I knew it had legs. I just knew it had legs in a different environment. And that point in Wales, I think I was drinking like a San Miguel at the time, was definitely like a pivot point for me. And I was like, right, let's build something different. Let's pivot now before I get too far along where a pivot may be harder.
Yeah. So in your mind, the acquisition was a solution to that?
Yeah, in my mind, it was a way out. There was probably other avenues, but for me, those other avenues of, bringing another chief exec on board, but I just didn't want anything to do with it. I was so burnt out with like the thought of it in my head. It was horrendous. I'd wake up on my phone, like my customer service notification would be like through the roof every single day, or there'd be a problem, and it'd be a problem I wouldn't enjoy solving. And I understand you have those times in business, but it was the first ever time I'd had away from my computer, and I think I had a little bit of a bit of time to reflect on that half day. I had a bit of time where I wasn't on my phone, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. I don't want to have my head down like that.
Where you got to is because the margins were pretty good, as you were mentioning, but what like a lot of people don't think about is like the variable cost when it comes to things like time and customer service, Because like when people think about variable costs, they think about like, yeah, materials and like packaging and stuff like that. How much money you need to spend to process each order and each customer. Whereas what you're kind of describing is like you're getting to a stage where you have more customers, but with more customers as a group, you have more problems. If you think like 2% have a problem each month or something, 2%, as that group grow, it'll be more. And if you've only got like you and a few different people managing it, then yeah, that time cost becomes huge. So I think that's what you're kind of experiencing there. In terms of the acquisition, this is an interesting one because you were getting to a stage where you weren't enjoying the business and you were looking for kind of a way out and you didn't want anything to do with it, as you just mentioned. With the acquisition, I know you can't talk about massively, but did they come to you, or did you like actively seek out a business to acquire you?
We knew we had a couple options abroad. People that had approached us in the past. And to be quite frank, we probably could have gotten a better deal if we would have waited longer. But in my head as well, the business would have dropped quite drastically if we would have kept going, because we were running it at max capacity. It was going to stall as a company if we didn't get rid of it at this time. We kind of caught it at like you said, it's a bit of a chart. We caught it kind of at the peak point where we couldn't add anything else to this business. We were just kind of keeping it going. There was no we had done our part and there was no progression there. And to be honest, I kind of looked at it from like a mental health perspective. Like, it was taking its toll on relationships, friendships, and it wasn't worth it. Like, if I knew the company would be worth 10 million in 5 years, in 2 years, I could have held out for the 2 years. It's that I knew that we were at the point of the max returns, and it wasn't worth it for me for it to be affecting relationships and friendships. And I knew I had the skills and ability to, off the back of Haze Cards, to go and raise these funds and build something quicker that had more potential and something I actually enjoy building.
Yeah. Just quickly on the acquisition before we move on to the pivot. How did you have those acquisition, I guess, options, as you mentioned?
Yeah. Competitors in the NFC space, actually, like you as well. We at that point, I tried to grow my LinkedIn a little bit as well, and we did a bit of outreach on LinkedIn to kind of see what was out there. But we set up with a partner that was our fierce competitor at the start, and then at the end, it turned out to be the right buy for them.
So it was literally like direct outreach, essentially.
Oh yeah, 100%. We had I remember this is how busy we were. We had an active email list of, I want to say 25,000 emails off the night of Dragon's Den, customer emails that we hadn't even reached out to. It was a newsletter list. Yeah. And it's like we had so many resources that would have gone to waste if we hadn't have achieved the acquisition. We couldn't even tap into those emails because we were so busy. We didn't even tap into paid media using the Dragon's Den features. We didn't even tap. I think we stopped even posting on Instagram, TikTok, because we were just at our limit. And for me, it was like we had all these resources that were incredible. The email list of tens of thousands of Shopify customer emails that we hadn't even reached out to. And it's like, there's so much potential there, but we couldn't do that. We couldn't, and I didn't want that to go to waste. And it was just perfect timing for all involved. And for me as well, I didn't want to be doing that for my later years.
Makes sense. Okay, yeah, let's quickly move on to the pivot side. So yeah, you got rid of the business, you got it acquired, which is amazing. Massive congratulations there. What was the next step after that? So what you're doing now, essentially?
Yeah. So after that, we were thinking like, what do we want to go into? I thought kind of the best possible business to go into would be to solve a problem we were having at Haze Cards, and that was the ability to offer customized products or products that have configurations and different layouts and quoting functions, all sorts, kind of like on the Shopify app store as well as the Etsy third-party app store, Wix, Squarespace, whatever. And we were like, right, we know this market so well. We've been through the trenches in this market. We know the flaws. We know problems to solve. We have a great network and a great team around us. Why not? And to be honest, I look back and I think the team we had there, their skills and mindset were best placed in a tech business, not in a physical product. And we use that team in a physical product. And it's like, why are we using our resources in a business that would thrive better on the tech side? So we're like, right, let's go into tech. We've got a great team that can build this out. And we ended up raising £250,000 in 8 to 10 weeks. I want to say 8 weeks, but 8 to 10, just before my 20th birthday. My aim was to do it before my 20th birthday. So then, yeah, but an absolute whirlwind there again. But I think for us, I was so sure I knew I could solve the problems, and I knew there was a market for the problems that I could solve, because us as the merchant before had faced those problems, and our network had faced those problems, and we knew we could fix it. And it was just an obvious path to go down.
That's really exciting. So I guess what's the next stage there? What people can look forward to?
Yeah, I think we've got our full release in the Shopify App Store in January this upcoming year, as well as the Etsy store and Wix. So we'll be
very cool
publishing on there very, very soon.
Myles, we're gonna wrap up the podcast there, but it was such a pleasure chatting to you, and all that stuff around Dragon's Den, around Haze Cards, starting in your bedroom, massively cool story, and very, very happy to have you on, essentially.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much again, and I guess last question: how can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably best. MYLES, Myles Dickinson, and then on Instagram as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, my friend, for coming on. And I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Cheers.